3 children, left behind, alone, trapped in a house that was supposed to be their safe haven. Days turned into weeks, their cries for help ignored, their tiny voices silenced by the walls around them. No one came, no one saw, until it was too late. What happened inside that house would shock an entire nation. And the truth, it's far worse than anyone could have imagined. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, nestled between rows of ordinary homes, a dark secret festered behind closed doors. 3 young children, alone, abandoned, left to fend for themselves in a place that should have been their sanctuary. No parents, no protection, no escape. For months, their suffering went unnoticed. Neighbors passed by, unaware. Authorities overlooked the warning signs. And as the days stretched into weeks, the walls of that house became both a prison and a graveyard of innocence. But then, a single moment shattered the silence. A discovery so horrifying, it sent shockwaves through the entire community. The truth of what happened behind that locked door was something no one was prepared to face. What should happen to parents who abandon their own children? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. To understand how 3 innocent children ended up abandoned, starving, and forgotten, we need to go back to the beginning, to the people who should have protected them, but instead left them to disappear into the shadows. The parents, once seen as just another struggling couple in the neighborhood, lived in a small, aging house on the edge of town, a place where laughter should have echoed, where warmth and safety should have been guaranteed. Instead, that house held secrets. Secrets that no one dared to look too closely at. Until it was too late. Their mother, Amanda Caldwell, was 32 years old. On the surface, she appeared to be just another overwhelmed parent, frazzled, distant, always in a hurry. But beneath that exterior was something far more troubling. Neighbors would later recall how she rarely made eye contact, how her children clung to her when she left the house as if afraid she might never come back, and sometimes she didn't. Their father, Daniel Caldwell, 35, was even more of a mystery. A man who, according to court records, had a long history of run-ins with the law. Petty theft, fraud, substance abuse. But none of that had seemed alarming enough to raise a red flag. Not then. Not until much later. For a while, they blended in. They weren't friendly, but they weren't outright hostile. They paid their rent most of the time. They came and went like ghosts. But if you look closely, if you listened hard enough, the warning signs were there. It started small. Missed doctor's appointments, late school tuition payments. The children, Malcolm, 9 years old, Ellie, 6, and baby Noah, just 3, were often seen playing outside alone. Even in the cold, their clothes dirty and too thin for the season. At school, Malcolm's teacher, Mrs. Holloway, noticed how his lunchbox often sat unopened, empty except for a single piece of bread. When she asked him why he wasn't eating, he just shrugged. "I'm saving it for my sister," he told her once. That was the first red flag. Ellie, bright-eyed and talkative, had once been the kind of child who raised her hand in class, eager to share her stories, but over time, she grew quiet, withdrawn. And then one day, she stopped coming to school altogether. Noah was too young to speak up, too young to understand why his world was slowly crumbling around him. Concerned, Mrs. Holloway called Amanda Caldwell, left messages, reached out again and again, no response, and she wasn't the only one. A neighbor, Ms. Rodriguez, had also started noticing strange things. Toys left outside in the rain for days, the front door left slightly open, yet no one ever seemed to come or go. And, most unsettling of all, the occasional sound of a baby crying late into the night, with no one soothing him. Something didn't feel right, she would later say in an interview. But what do? You don't want to assume the worst about your neighbors. And I kept thinking, maybe I was just imagining things. But she wasn't, and neither was Mrs. Holloway. The warning signs were everywhere, and still, nothing was done. Then came the first official report. A concerned citizen, never publicly identified, made a call to Child Protective Services. An anonymous tip about suspected neglect, about children left alone for hours at a time. CPS agents visited the home. They knocked, waited. Eventually, Amanda answered the door, groggy, irritated. She insisted everything was fine, that she had just been sleeping, that her kids were at a friend's house. The agents noted the mess. the unwashed dishes, the stale smell in the air, but there were no visible bruises, no signs of immediate danger, and so the case was marked as low priority. A follow-up was scheduled, but it never came, and so the children remained unseen, unheard, and still the walls around them continued to close in. The first signs of true neglect, as weeks turned into months, the situation worsened. Amanda and Daniel stopped pretending altogether. The days they spent away grew longer. Sometimes they left in the morning and didn't come back until the next day. Then 2 days, then a week. The refrigerator was nearly empty, save for spoiled milk and half-eaten leftovers. The cupboards held little more than canned vegetables and dry cereal. And worst of all, the doors to the house, once left slightly open, were now locked. From the outside, they had trapped their own children inside. Malcolm, just 9 years old, became the protector, the provider. He would carefully ration the food they had, making sure Ellie and Noah ate first. He'd press his ear against the door, listening for the sound of footsteps, hoping, waiting, dreading. He would whisper bedtime stories to Ellie when she cried at night, telling her that Mommy and Daddy would be home soon. But soon never came. Ellie, ever the dreamer, started talking to her stuffed animals as if they were real people, telling them she was hungry, asking them when Mommy would come home, but they never answered. And Noah, too young to understand, too weak to cry anymore, began to grow silent. The strangest thing about this case is how close they were to help. Just next door, families were living their normal lives, cooking dinner, watching TV, laughing, and all the while, just a few feet away, 3 children sat in a dark house growing weaker by the day. Did no one hear them? Did no one notice? Maybe they did. Maybe they saw the little boy who looked too thin. Maybe they wondered why Ellie never played outside anymore. Maybe they heard the occasional sound of Noah whimpering through the walls. But in the end, they all did the same thing. They turned away. Until one day, someone didn't. And that's when the horror of it all finally came to light. By the time the truth was finally uncovered, the horrors inside that house had reached an unimaginable level. No food, no electricity, no warmth, just 3 helpless children, trapped in filth, surviving on sheer will alone. The moment first responders stepped inside, the stench hit them like a wall. A thick, suffocating blend of rotting food, urine, and mildew. The air was heavy, stale, like it hadn't been touched by fresh oxygen in months. Cockroaches scurried across the floor, their tiny feet clicking against the stained, peeling linoleum. Mice darted between empty cereal boxes, their nests built inside the children's tattered clothing. The refrigerator was wide open, but it didn't matter. It was empty, except for a single mold-covered loaf of bread and a nearly translucent carton of expired milk. The sink piled high with dishes, long since dried and crusted over. The bathroom, no running water, no soap, just a toilet clogged and overflowing, staining the cracked tile floor. And in the middle of it all, 3 children, ghostly thin, their skin pale, their hair matted, their eyes dull with exhaustion. They had learned to live in the filth, to ignore the smell, to accept the hunger, because for them, this was normal. This was life. When the food ran out, they searched for scraps. Malcolm, just 9 years old, became the provider. He scoured the kitchen for anything edible, digging through trash, scraping together the last crumbs from an old bag of chips. When there was nothing left, he tore open old condiment packets from the fridge, squeezing mustard and ketchup onto his fingers just to have something to taste. Ellie, only 6, grew weaker by the day. She sucked on ice cubes, when there were any left in the freezer, just to trick her stomach into thinking it was full. And when there was no water, Malcolm did the unthinkable. He filled an old cup from the toilet bowl. He knew it was dirty. He knew it was wrong. But he also knew one thing. If they didn't drink, they would die. And then there was Noah, the youngest. Too small to understand what was happening, too innocent to know the difference between survival and suffering. His cries had faded weeks ago. Now he barely had the energy to whimper. His little hands, once chubby and full of life, had thinned out, his ribs visible, his stomach swollen from malnutrition. He clung to Ellie for warmth, his tiny fingers gripping her torn dress like a lifeline. Every night they huddled together in a single stained mattress on the floor, whispering to each other in the dark. Malcolm would tell Ellie stories, tales of adventures and heroes, just to keep her mind away from the hunger gnawing at her insides. But he could see it. She was slipping. They all were. And still, no one came. Neglect isn't just about hunger or physical pain. It's about the slow erosion of hope, the feeling that you have been forgotten, that you are invisible. For Malcolm, that feeling turned into something else. Anger. He blamed himself for not being strong enough, for not finding more food, for not protecting his siblings the way an older brother should. He knew their parents weren't coming back. Deep down, he knew. But saying it out loud would make it real. And so, he didn't. Ellie? She started talking to her stuffed animals again, whispering to them in the middle of the night, telling them about the world outside, the way she remembered it before the darkness took over. Sometimes she'd stare at the front door for hours, waiting, hoping. And Noah, he had stopped crying, stopped moving. His small body curled into itself as if trying to disappear altogether. The call that changed everything. And then, one night, something happened. A sound, a noise they hadn't heard in weeks. The ringing of a phone. Malcolm scrambled toward it, heart pounding. He picked it up, pressed it to his ear, static. Then a voice, faint, familiar, their mother's. Malcolm? His hands trembled. Mom, we're hungry. We don't have any food. Noah's sick. Please come home. There was silence. Then a sigh. And then the click of the call disconnected. Malcolm held the phone against his ear long after the line had gone dead. He wanted to believe she was coming back, that she had heard him, that she had finally realized what she had done. But hours passed, then days, and no one came. That's when Malcolm made the decision that would save their lives. He found an old shattered cell phone their father had left behind. No service, no numbers saved. Just a cracked screen and a fading battery. But one number still worked, 910. The 911 called. The operator's voice was calm, professional. 911, what's your emergency? A pause, then a weak, trembling voice. The voice of a child far too young to be making this call. Please, we need help. Our mom and dad are gone. We don't have any food. My brother, he won't wake up. There was a rustling sound on the other end. Urgency. The dispatcher's voice softened. Sweetheart, where are you? A sniffle, then Malcolm's voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. The call lasted 2 minutes and 36 seconds. Just long enough for first responders to trace the location. Just long enough for them to realize what they were dealing with. Just long enough to save them. By the time the police arrived, Malcolm had propped Noah's tiny body against his chest, gently rocking him back and forth, trying to keep him warm. Ellie sat beside him, eyes hollow, barely aware of what was happening. The door was locked. The officers had to break it down, and what they found inside would haunt them forever. 3 children, alone, starving, forgotten, but now, finally, seen. Survival had always been difficult, but now, it was impossible. Days had passed since Malcolm made that phone call. The fridge had been empty for weeks. The pipes had run dry, and Noah wasn't waking up. Malcolm knew they wouldn't last much longer. He needed help. He needed someone, anyone, to see them, to notice, to care. A desperate attempt for help. He had tried everything. The phone barely worked, and now the battery was dead. The door was locked from the outside, and even if he could open it, where would he go? He didn't know the way to the nearest store. He didn't even know how far he'd have to walk. He was just a kid, trapped, abandoned, and running out of time. And so, he did the only thing he could think of. He went to the window. With shaky hands, Malcolm climbed onto a broken chair and peered outside. The street was empty. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance he could hear laughter, children playing in another yard, in another world where parents still tucked their kids in at night, where food was cooked on a stove, where warmth wasn't just a memory. Tears stung his eyes. He gritted his teeth, and then, with all the strength he had left, he banged on the glass. Help, someone please! His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. He pounded harder, the glass rattled, his small fists ached. But still, no one came. And then he saw her. An old woman across the street, a neighbor. She was watering her plants, moving slowly, her head down, focused on the dirt beneath her feet. Malcolm banged again, harder this time. Please, we need help. For a second, just a second, her head lifted. Her eyes met his. Malcolm's heart raced. She saw him. She saw him. And then she looked away. She turned, went inside, closed the door. No one came. It wasn't the first time someone had ignored them. It wasn't the first time someone had chosen to look away. Weeks earlier, a concerned teacher had called Child Protective Services. Ellie had shown up to school with the same dirty clothes 3 days in a row, her hair unbrushed, dark circles under her eyes. The teacher had asked gentle questions. Ellie had smiled weakly, saying her mommy was just busy and that they were okay. But the teacher knew better. She filed a report. And CPS said, "Nothing." They had visited the house once before, months ago. A caseworker knocked on the door. No one answered. They left a note. The file was marked for follow-up. The follow-up never came. The system, one designed to protect the most vulnerable, had failed them. And now it was almost too late. The 911 call that changed everything. Malcolm couldn't wait any longer. He had tried the window. He had tried shouting. No one was listening. So, with trembling fingers, he picked up the dead phone. It was cracked, useless. He shook it as if that would bring it back to life. Nothing. Then, in desperation, he yanked open a drawer and started digging through it. Old batteries, rusty keys, a few pennies, and then a charger. He ran to the nearest outlet and plugged it in. The tiny red light blinked once, then twice, then life. He didn't hesitate. He dialed the only number he knew would work. 911, what's your emergency? A deep breath, a pause, and then, please, we need help. My little brother won't wake up. The police arrived 13 minutes later. 13 minutes that felt like an eternity. Malcolm sat on the floor, holding Noah's limp body against his chest, whispering softly into his ear, "Stay awake, buddy, just a little longer." The sirens were loud. Flashing lights filled the room. Doors burst open. Officers rushed in. And then the unthinkable happened. One of the officers knelt beside them, pressing 2 fingers against Noah's tiny wrist. His face went pale. He grabbed his radio. His voice was urgent. "Desperate. We need paramedics." The front door creaked open, revealing a darkness thicker than just the absence of light. The air inside was suffocating, stale, rancid, the unmistakable stench of decay and neglect. Officers stepped inside cautiously, their boots sticking to the filthy floor. What they found in that house would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The living room was a disaster. Piles of trash, rotting food containers, dirty clothes scattered across the floor. But it was the silence that made their skin crawl. There was no sound of children playing, no voices, no life. One officer turned a corner and gasped. A small, frail figure was curled up on the floor, barely breathing. His skin was pale, stretched over his tiny frame like parchment. He was skeletal, his ribs pressing against his thin shirt. His lips were cracked, his eyes sunken, half-lidded as if too tired to stay open. "We need medics in here now!" Malcolm and Ellie were huddled nearby, shaking. Their eyes were wide, haunted. They flinched as the officers approached, as if expecting a blow rather than help. Their clothes were stiff with filth, their hair matted, their fingers raw and cracked from trying to claw through walls in search of anything to eat. One officer crouched down, his voice soft. "It's okay. You're safe now." Malcolm's lip trembled. He wanted to believe it, but after months of being invisible, of screaming into silence, how could he? The evidence of pure neglect. As officers searched the rest of the house, the full picture of horror emerged. The kitchen. The fridge door hung open, completely empty except for a single mold-covered slice of bread. There was no running water. The sink was filled with dirty dishes, covered in thick green sludge. Cockroaches scurried into the cracks of the wall as flashlights passed over them. The bedrooms, no mattresses, just piles of old blankets stiff with dirt and stains. The walls had scratches, tiny fingernail marks where children had clawed at the paint in desperation. The bathroom, the toilet was overflowing. The bathtub was caked with grime. There was no soap, no toothpaste, nothing to keep a child clean, nothing to remind them they were human. The hallway closet, and then the closet. An officer pulled the door open and recoiled. Inside there were restraints, a belt tied to a pipe, a dark stain on the wooden floor, a place where someone No, a child had been locked away for hours, maybe days, maybe longer. One officer had to step outside for air. Another clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. But they had a job to do, and they weren't finished yet. The parents, denial, disappearance, or defensiveness. As officers processed the scene, one question remained. Where were the parents? First attempts to contact them, calls went unanswered. The number was disconnected. Neighbors report some said they hadn't seen the parents in weeks, others said they had moved in and out of the home sporadically but never with the kids. Tracked down at a motel, finally a lead, security footage showed the mother and father at a rundown motel across town. They were drinking, laughing, playing cards, as their children starved. When police finally confronted them, the mother, disheveled, reeking of alcohol, crossed her arms and scoffed. "They're exaggerating," she slurred. "The kids are fine. They're just dramatic." The father didn't say a word. He just stared blankly at the officers as if they were an inconvenience, as if this was all some minor misunderstanding. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crime. And they were going to pay for it. The children had been rescued. The house, now a crime scene, stood as a chilling monument to neglect. But the real question remained, why? How could two parents abandon their own children, leaving them to suffer in silence? The investigation would uncover more than just negligence. It would reveal a level of cruelty that shook the entire community to its core. The interrogations, lies, excuses, and cold indifference. At the precinct, the mother sat slouched in a metal chair, her arms crossed. She yawned, barely glancing at the detectives. The father sat beside her, silent, his foot tapping impatiently. They weren't worried, they weren't even angry. If anything, they were annoyed. The mother's defense, "Look, we just needed a break. Kids are stressful, you know. They're lying. They always exaggerate things. They weren't starving. There was food in the house. This is all blown out of proportion. It's not like we hit them or anything." The father's silence. The father refused to answer most questions. When asked why they left their kids alone for weeks, he shrugged. "I don't know. She handled all that stuff. They seemed fine to me." Detectives pressed harder, laying out the evidence. Photos of the filthy house, the empty fridge, medical reports detailing severe malnutrition, and the most damning of all, the children's own testimonies. The psychological profile. Negligence, mental illness, or intentional cruelty? As the case unfolded, psychologists weighed in. Was this just bad parenting, or was there something more sinister at play? Negligence? If it had been a single incident, if they had left their children alone for just a few days, it could have been argued as recklessness. But this had been months of starvation, filth, and suffering. This was no accident. Mental illness? The mother's erratic behavior suggested possible substance abuse. Witnesses reported seeing her drinking heavily and using drugs in the past. But was addiction an excuse? Intentional cruelty? Some experts believed the neglect was more than just apathy. It was deliberate. Reports surfaced of the mother locking one child in a closet for bad behavior. Neighbors recalled hearing cries in the night. The father, though quieter, had ignored it all. Whether it was neglect or intentional cruelty, one fact was clear. These children had been discarded, as if they didn't matter. The charges, a case that shocked the nation. Public outrage exploded as details of the case hit the media. The court of public opinion had already declared them guilty. But legally, what could be proven? The charges against the parents: child endangerment for leaving the children alone for extended periods, felony child neglect due to the severe malnutrition and unsanitary conditions, false statements for initially lying to investigators, potential homicide. If Noah didn't survive, the charges could escalate to manslaughter or even murder. At their first court hearing, the parents showed no remorse. The mother rolled her eyes as the charges were read. The father stared blankly at the judge. But the public wasn't fooled. These weren't parents who had made a mistake. These were people who had made a choice. The testimonies that changed everything, and then the children spoke. Malcolm's testimony, the oldest brother, age 9, "I tried to take care of them, I really did, but I couldn't find any food. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I was really quiet, maybe someone would hear us, but nobody ever came." Ellie's testimony, the sister, age 6, "Mommy said she would come back, she promised, but she never did. I was so hungry. Sometimes I ate little pieces of paper because my tummy hurt so bad. The social worker's testimony: in all my years, I have never seen children in a condition this severe. They were moments away from death. The neighbors regret: I saw him at the window that day, the little boy. I looked away. I should have done something. I will never forgive myself. With every testimony, the courtroom grew heavier. There were no excuses left, no justifications. Only the unbearable weight of truth. As the trial neared its end, the question wasn't if they were guilty. It was how much they would pay for what they had done, and whether justice would be enough. The trial ended, the verdict was delivered, but for the children, the scars of neglect could not be erased with the judge's ruling. Their journey was far from over. The question remained: what happened to them after the world moved on? The fate of the children, a long road to healing. After being rescued, Malcolm, Ellie, and Noah were placed in emergency care. Their bodies were frail, their stomachs unable to handle full meals. Doctors worked to treat their malnutrition, but the psychological wounds were far more complex. Malcolm, the oldest, aged 9, as the eldest, Malcolm had carried the burden of protecting his siblings. He refused to sleep with the lights off, haunted by the months of loneliness and fear. At first, he wouldn't eat meals normally. He hoarded food, hiding bread under his bed, terrified it would disappear. He struggled to trust adults, but after months in therapy, he finally started to believe that this time he was safe. Ellie, the middle child, age 6, Ellie was withdrawn, barely speaking for weeks after the rescue. She flinched at loud noises, her small body still reacting to the trauma. She struggled to play like other kids, unsure how to be a child again after so much suffering. Noah, the youngest, age 3, the weakest of the three, Noah had the most severe medical complications. Doctors feared long-term developmental delays due to prolonged malnutrition, but his new foster parents said he had a spark, a resilience that defied the odds. In the end, Malcolm and Ellie were placed together in a loving foster home. Noah was adopted separately, given the specialized care he needed. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a chance to rewrite their story. Justice for the parents. Did they pay for their crimes? The parents faced trial, but would the punishment fit the crime? The mother, sentenced to 25 years in prison for felony child neglect and endangerment. She showed little remorse, still insisting it wasn't that bad. The father received 20 years, found guilty of willful neglect. He remained mostly silent throughout the trial, offering no defense, no apology. Parole possibilities. Some argued that their sentences weren't enough. Others believed justice had been served. But one thing was certain: neither of them would ever regain custody of their children. This case sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. People asked, how did this happen? Why didn't someone step in sooner? And what could be done to stop it from happening again? CPS reform. Following public outrage, local authorities increased funding for child protective services. Caseworkers were given fewer cases to handle, ensuring that no red flags were overlooked. Stronger neglect laws. This case led to harsher penalties for extreme child neglect, preventing parents from escaping with light sentences. Community awareness. Schools and neighbors were urged to report signs of neglect sooner. The idea that it's not my business could no longer be an excuse. For many, these changes came too late, but for the next child suffering in silence, maybe, just maybe, it could save them. Years passed. The children grew older, but some wounds never truly fade. One night, Malcolm's foster mother heard him screaming. She rushed into his room, finding him curled up, shaking. "What's wrong, honey?" she whispered, pulling him into her arms. He gasped between sobs. I thought you left. I thought we were alone again." Even after all this time, the fear of being forgotten still lingered. Because when you've spent your whole life being invisible, the fear never really leaves. If you ever suspect a child is in danger, don't look away. Don't assume someone else will step in. Because for these children, there was no one until it was almost too late. This case is one of the most heartbreaking examples of neglect I've ever covered, but now I want to hear from you. Do you think the justice system failed these children? Should the parents have received a harsher sentence? Or do you believe the real failure happened long before the trial even began? Let's talk in the comments. And remember, if you ever suspect a child is in danger, don't hesitate. Speak up. You could be the only voice they have. If you found this case disturbing, wait until you hear about the next one, a case so shocking it left even the most hardened investigators speechless. Click here to watch now. Even after all this time, Malcolm still wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, afraid, alone, wondering if one day the world will forget about him all over again.